You. You're the person the world needs. Life is changing, and the future is uncertain. You may not know how or why yet, but you know you're here to make a difference. You're not waiting for the universe to give you the answers. You're finding them for yourself. Challenging echoes with evidence. Few people have great ideas. Even fewer make them happen. It takes a dreamer, an explorer, a researcher, a leader, a thinker. It takes someone like you.
Good evening and welcome to the University of New South Wales. My apologies for the technical difficulties that we encountered on the way into this event this evening. If we were hosting this as a physical event, I promise you that it would have been raining and there would have been a traffic jam. So thank you for bearing with us and making it. You are in the right place. We're going to be talking about switching careers. I'm here on the campus at UNSW. And before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Bedegal people, and acknowledge elders both past, present, and emerging, and any who may be joining us here this evening. Now, we've got a really exciting program to take you through this evening. I'm joined by three very, very different and interesting panelists to talk through their different journeys in switching careers and making those really, really major life decisions. Many of you joining us tonight will be grappling with similar decisions, and I hope that lots of the insights that we share will help you to make those. Now, I'm going to introduce my panelists shortly, but let me tell you a little bit about them. I've got Emily Howes, our Master of Teaching primary current student. She's a Bachelor of Design alumni. And I would like to really welcome any UNSW alumni that are joining us here this evening as well. It's fantastic to have you back and connecting with the university in any format. I'm also joined by Melissa Chan, who's a Master of Commerce alumna, and she has been a strategist, a writer, a consultant. She's going to take us through a really interesting and diverse career journey this evening as well. And last but certainly not least, Simone Donovan, who's the Head of Talent Acquisition here at University of New South Wales. She's going to give us a little bit of perspective from the employer angle and also talk about some of the surprising changes that she's made over the course of her career as well. We're going to discuss all of those journeys with our panelists, and there's also plenty of opportunity for you to ask questions. I'd invite you to put your questions in the chat box there, and we'll get through as many as we can in the second half of this evening's program. Without any further ado, though, I would like to welcome my panel. Firstly, I'll say hello to Emily Howes. Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us this evening. Now, you have just arrived into a different sort of career than what you may have started in. I'm going to take you there later. Take us back, cast your mind back a little bit to where it all started. What did you graduate and go off and do in the big wide world?
Yeah, sure. So, as you mentioned, I graduated from Bachelor of Design here at UNSW, but I realised partway through those studies that wasn't going to be the career that I would pursue, but it was still a very rewarding and enriching experience, as education always is. So instead I directed my initial graduate career into the publishing industry, where I'd been working concurrent with study, and that's where I had my experience, and I'd already also found my passion doing that. So I started in book publishing and ended up in magazine publishing eventually. And throughout that whole experience, it was a really wonderful sense of feeling at home, feeling my calling, like that very sort of hard to put your finger on it, that kind of intimate sense of place and purpose in a career. It was a great blend between my skill set, so the technical skills I could bring, so I was working in editorial roles, but also my passions, so I was able to do storytelling and connect with people and bring my visual arts passions to those positions over those years. Yeah, but then...
so what happened there? Because publishing, it's a pretty disrupted industry, looking at it from the outside.
Yes.
So was that a factor in then deciding to shift your focus a little bit?
Yes. So that was a fairly reluctant shift because, as I mentioned, I felt quite stable and at home in publishing. And it came as quite a shock and a crisis when, as we might say, the robots invaded. And
look, I've actually been really clinging to the fact that the robots can't take over because someone's got to program the robots, which is not me, but hopefully someone knows how to do it. So tell us what happened then in publishing.
Maybe don't program them too well though, please. Right. So in publishing, there's this little thing that happened that you might have heard of called the internet, which turned out to be the place where people ended up preferring to get their information from reading articles and not paying for it. And that does make these publishing businesses a little bit hard to run. So I was in a position where I was hoping to progress my career. I felt quite capable, I felt confident, I wanted to find something, take a step up. And then I was in a position where 3 jobs in a row, I had 3 offers internally in the company I was working for, and all 3 of them had their funding, didn't come through. So I saw the writing on the wall. By the 3rd time, I was like, okay, this is more than just bad luck. I have to find an exit. I need to get out of here. So that was what led me to my first career change, which was from publishing into marketing and communications. Shall I proceed?
You talked a little bit about the role of narrative and storytelling in publishing.
Yeah.
So is that a natural progression then into marketing and communications?
To some extent. Anyone working in marketing would know how important storytelling is in order to bring that to a kind of sales objective. It is inherently hardwired in us, in our biology, that we seek stories. So that's a very important and powerful medium that we can use to communicate with each other. So there was a degree of transfer, I think, from publishing to that kind of environment, but I found ultimately I was in marketing and communications for about 5 years in 3 different roles, but the heart wasn't there. I couldn't find that sense of calling that I really, really felt that I needed. Yeah, so that's what led me to my second career change and why I'm back at uni with my little laptop.
Because you're a current student and we've dragged you away from your studies to join us on the panel tonight.
Yes.
I'm going to come back and talk about that. You are a master's student and the Masters of Education, and I'll cover off on why and where that's taking you shortly.
Sure.
But Melissa, if I come to you, because you've already completed a Master's, you did your Masters of Commerce here at the University of New South Wales. Tell me a little bit about what got you to that point.
Yeah, sure. So my Master's, I probably completed about 10 years ago, to be honest. So it's a little while back.
It's almost a bit of a walk down memory lane.
It is a little bit. I guess so. Originally my undergrad was actually in media and communications. And so I did a little bit in journalism and then also in sort of corporate comms. And it was in that sort of corporate comms, I was working for a PR agency at the time, where I realised that a lot of our clients were sort of in the business world. And I was writing press releases and doing comms strategies for them. But part of me recognised that I didn't fully appreciate or understand really how business worked. And I felt that was a real gap in my knowledge. And so part of the drive to go back and study was actually to plug that, what I perceived to be sort of a knowledge or a skill gap. Yeah,
so tell me a little bit about that, because that could be, I'd imagine that members of our audience would find that is a frustration or a curiosity. What was it for you? Was it?
I guess all throughout my career, I've always been sort of innately curious. And for me, it was a bit of curiosity. I mean, part of me thought, well, look, if I could understand business a bit better, regardless if I came back to comms or not, it would probably serve me really well just to be able to have that as an extra something in my, skill set or toolkit. In order to kind of bring more value for our clients. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And so then it was the business skill set. It was the Masters of Commerce to give you that additional string to your bow. How did you find it going into the Masters program?
It was awesome. I mean, I'd always thought, I'm such a nerd, so I'd always thought I'd go back and study at some point.
Yep.
And doing postgrad is actually really different, I felt, to doing an undergrad, because everyone really, really, really wants to be there. There's an extra sort of level of commitment and engagement that is a little bit different to doing an undergrad. And I remember when I was sitting actually in one of my very first lectures for the Master of Commerce, which I think was called like Managing Value Creation 1 or something like that. And it was a strategy subject. And I remember sitting in that going, this is so interesting, because it kind of unpacked how a business works, what people think about, how to grow it, and that kind of thing. And yeah, I really enjoyed the whole experience.
Okay, so I'm not going to focus too much on your studies,
Sure.
But I'm really interested in, you added this commercial acumen to your skill set and your portfolio, and that sent you in quite a different direction to the marketing sort of world that you've been in previously. Where did you go after your Masters of Commerce?
Yeah, so I ended up getting a grad role in a management consultancy. So it was sort of an ex-McKinsey shop called Port Jackson Partners. It was completely different to sort of my media background. So previously I was writing media releases and doing sort of a comm strategy, and then I was in this world surrounded by actuaries and economists doing Excel modelling and, you know, working completely different projects. And so yeah, it was a really entirely different experience. Yeah.
And what did you learn? Because it sounds like you've actually put some time into codifying what you've taken out of each different area that you've worked in. What did management consulting add to your bow?
It gave me a really great foundation for just understanding problem solving. And so that's something that, you know, in addition to sort of the Masters of Commerce where you learn accounting and finance and that kind of thing, this extra skill set of like, how do you solve a problem is relevant and universal to almost every industry, almost every kind of function in a business. And so that really has helped carry through sort of, I guess, throughout my career.
Right. And so you develop this confidence in being able to problem solve and analyze and, you know, work through everything. Where do you go after that? Because that's sort of now, that's a big, you've opened up everything here, right?
I guess I've always been a bit of a generalist in some ways. So I think earlier on in my career, I really emphasized collecting skills that could be really valuable for later. I guess now it's really a function of, okay, so I know that I can kind of go and work potentially in any industry and know that I can kind of familiarize myself with the content. Now I feel it's becoming more discerning about, well, what is it that I truly enjoy in terms of content and subject matter. And that's where you can start to apply the skills. Yeah,
and it sounds like that collection of skills is giving you a lot of confidence in your ability to sort of apply them elsewhere as well. Is that a fair assessment?
Definitely. I think it's funny just, that on that topic of confidence, like I don't feel that I was necessarily the most confident person starting out in my career. And I think just over time having built a really strong foundation of problem solving and collecting different skills, now when I'm faced with a problem, there's sort of this, like I may not have done this before, but I know that there have been multiple times in my life and career that I've been faced with an unknown problem to solve, and knowing that at some point, there's always this point where the mist clears and you can kind of see like a certain way forward or a clarity, which I really love.
Okay. And we'll come back a little bit later and explore that idea of, where that understanding of yourself took you, because it sounded like you had that curiosity and that's taking you in some directions that I want to go through a little bit as well. But Emily, back to you, because you where we left off with you was this idea that you were missing something in yourself as well. You weren't feeling like you were doing what you really ultimately wanted to be doing.
Yeah.
So what was the questions that you started to ask yourself in that context?
Yeah, it's so great hearing Melissa talk about her experience, because I relate to it. Parts of it. I mean, everyone's journey is very unique, but I think there are a lot of universalities as well. So you're asking me what questions I started asking myself. Yeah, so really I think there was a very important kind of cathartic moment. I can't remember exactly when it happened, but I remember what happened, which was when I realized that I had my priorities all wrong. I thought my personal project, was to tough it out in comms and marketing in the hope that this might get better and I might feel more at home, that I might feel more capable, that I would see a career path, that I would find a great mentor, I would find a great team. Something, these were all things that I hadn't materialized for me in the same way that I'd hoped they would. Ultimately, so that moment of clarity really sort of went, okay, no, that's a bogus goal. That isn't a proper project. the proper project is my own happiness and sense of place. The bigger goal here is not about this job or this career. This industry. It's about the career.
Yeah.
And it caused me to sort of look inwardly and really ask myself, like, what are my values? What do I really love in the jobs that I've really loved? What about them made me love them? You know what I mean? And I actually went to a great careers workshop, and I can't plug it because I can't remember the name, but hopefully it's on my LinkedIn profile.
We'll look it up.
Yeah, but I would plug it if I could remember. But it did the values activity where you kind of sort out from a big pile of values, like you whittle it down to a smaller number, and then from that smaller number you whittle it down again. And mine were things like connection, fun, academic, sort of intellectual pursuits, things like that. And combined with kind of what I know about my personality, it was really clear to me where my future should go. And it was when that was really the moment when I decided like that I had to acknowledge and respect the part of myself that had always wanted to be a teacher.
Right.
And to all the blockages, all the sort of roadblocks towards changing career at this age and stage. I've got 2 kids, so this kind of thing isn't done easily. There are a lot of sort of implications. I have to enlist the support of my husband. I have to work out practicalities about how we're going to care for our family, get our finances in order so that we don't go bankrupt while I don't have a salary, how we're going to pay for uni fees, all of that stuff. But the end goal for us, we decided, and I use the plural quite deliberately because it was a joint decision, we just, it's quite clear that happiness kind of trumps everything. And it is worth it. It's already worth it. Yeah.
It's an incredibly powerful story, and thank you for sharing it and sharing it with our audience. I think it's really important for people to hear that that idea that you can put that purpose at number one on the list of the things to achieve. It strikes me as well, though, that there would have been skills and elements of your past careers that would have fed into that as well.
Yeah.
When you're interrogating that, I think it's important when we think about switching careers that we don't leave everything behind. There's always something else, that underpins it. So what were some of the elements in your previous roles that gave you clues towards the teaching?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that too. And I mean, I really resonated with your description of kind of your toolbox of skills, Melissa. That I really believe that as well. I do not feel like a blank slate, and I do not, much as I honour my past graduate self,
Yep.
I do not feel like her anymore. I've had a couple of, dare I say it, decades in between where I've grown as a person. I've experienced lots of other things. I've been in workplaces. I've gained skills. So the skills that have been really, I find really useful right now, things like I've spent most of my career as a writer. So sitting in front of a laptop doing an assignment definitely has some pluses in that respect. But even I find just bringing a greater sense of maturity and professionalism and sort of experience of having worked in teams and institutional experience when I go and work in schools. All this gives me now, as a sort of mature age career changer, a head start in my new career. So, and I do think that teaching is a career that's particularly perhaps well suited to someone who has that kind of breadth of life experience. And my experience as a parent helps me understand children. Not that you have to be a parent to be a teacher, but these are all like parts of my skill set and personality that I've developed over time that I'm able to bring to this new adventure. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm guessing that you might have got some first-hand experience of teaching your children last year in COVID times.
Most definitely.
Is that a positive that came out of COVID?
I'm
searching for positives here, by the way. But
look, I will give you a positive, but I'm not going to give it without qualifications, because that's what we academics do. We love to sort of qualify things. Now that I'm obviously back at uni, I
Absolutely.
can
No, that
consider
makes
myself
sense.
an academic. So, homeschooling. This time last year, any parent doing it at the time, especially with a child of my son's age, he was 6 at the time, would know how hard that was. And there's that, in itself is hard. Then you have the kind of descent of Armageddon on top of it, this pandemic that to me was just terrifying and continues to be terrifying. So I'm not going to pretend that that was an easy experience, but for me, it was the moment where I really couldn't ignore. I talked about that cathartic moment. I'm not sure if it happened at exactly the same time as this, but it may have followed the experience. But when I was homeschooling my son, that was the first proper insight I had into what a teacher does. I mean, it's only partial, but I was like looking at his, timetable and the activities. I'm like, what am I doing with my life? Like, this is what I want to do. And I don't want to just do it with my kid. I want to do it with all the kids.
Yep.
So it was...
Recess every day at 10:30.
Yeah, crunch and sip, playground duty.
Yeah.
I'm up for it. So, so that really helped affirm the path for me. And my son is the most wonderful supporter that I have. He's, I really feel very grateful for him too. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to come back around to this idea of taking that plunge and throwing yourself in the support networks that you've got in place to sort of support you. But Melissa, I guess we stopped with you there, where you had really gained a thorough understanding of your skill set and what you had to offer the professional workforce, but you were starting to then interrogate that idea of how you could best apply it for your own, your soul. If I go really deep at this point in time, it's dark outside.
Yep.
Where did that take you?
Yeah, no, I really love, Emily, bringing this idea of values, because I really had to also interrogate, well, yeah, I could kind of apply my skills to anyone, the highest bidder or like whatever it happens to be. And so it's really a function of how do I want to spend my time and my resources. And for me, my values really came down to a few different things. Autonomy was really important to me, to know that I was, a decision maker of sorts, or that I had agency over, the process or the work that I was doing. Flexibility became really important to me, particularly because I have a few other interests. So I also teach yoga and meditation. And so being able to take time and leave work at a particular time to go and do those things, or to take time out, was really important to me as well. And then also just creativity. So being able to feel that I was able to create in some way. And that could change very much depending on the type of thing. I mean, it could either be, at the moment I'm a producer on a film, so there's a real sense of artistic sort of creativity there, but also, this might sound a bit nerdy, but the beauty of a well-designed system in a business or something like that. So just this idea of being able to create was really important to me as well.
Absolutely. And then all of those skill sets coming together, you just referenced the producer sort of role, which feels to me like it combines your history of, marketing and communications and the more commercial acumen that you have to be able to apply in that sort of sense.
Yeah, no, it's been a really, I never, finished uni and thought I'd ever produce a film or a documentary. But definitely it's kind of pulled different threads, We've worked on, how to write the script and, writing in a different context. A lot of it has been a bit project management like, trying to find the right talent and, and then research based. So thinking about the questions and the kind of through line of what we want to actually say in the story. So yeah, it's actually been a great convergence of a lot of my skill sets and interests.
Yeah, and one of those things that you just don't see coming. And
totally,
when you get there, it makes perfect sense, and someone like me can draw these threads. And
it's very helpful, Chris.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to help. And we're going to come back and explore some more of those bits and pieces as well. Because I think one of the things that we wanted to explore this evening was this idea of, do employers value that convergence and those skill sets that come together and make up the whole person at the end of the day. So I'll thank Emily and Melissa. They'll join me again for some further questions at the end of the evening. So do put your questions in the chat, and I'll pose those questions to you both. I'll give you 15 minutes to go and really think about what those answers might possibly be. And in the meantime, we're going to have a quick scene change. We'll be back in about 30 seconds to explore things from the employer angle. I'm going to be joined by Simone Donovan, the Head of Talent Acquisition here at the university, and she's going to talk us through exactly how employers are assessing those skill sets now and why it might be important to be able to articulate those. So stick around, we'll be right back. Thank you for sticking around. We're going to now talk about things from the employment aspect of the lens. Simone, thank you for joining me this evening. You haven't always been in talent acquisition. I'll come back and talk about that a little bit later. But I wanted to talk about this idea of the portfolio career, and you know, we've heard from two career switchers, Emily and Melissa, already this evening about some of the skills that they've picked up across different jobs and then applied that sort of learning and knowledge to take them forwards as they've sort of made that decision to switch and move on. As an employer, how does that reflect on the resume? Because we used to hear all this sort of thing like, oh, you can't be jumpy on your resume and that sort of thing. Where are we at on that conversation now?
Yes, good point. I think there is actually a big shift that's happened historically with that. I think, for example, of my own parents, where my father had just one job all his life, and so when I was changing jobs the first time, it seemed like a really big deal for him in a very negative light. I think over time I realised that a lot of people were looking to change careers, but you're right, there's a balance of not doing it too often. There are people that we call like job hoppers that will change every 6 or 12 months, and there's definitely a stigma around people having that perception of people not sticking to something too long. But I do think that there's been a shift from the other end of people staying in something for too long. So I know for employees, if somebody has been in one position in one company all their life, they'll sometimes question, is that person agile enough to pick up something that's completely different to what they've done? So I think adaptability is a new, flavour of the month really for employers of looking for that, and change.
Yeah, okay. So change is I guess something that is automatically you have to adapt to when you're in that career switching sort of mode. So what sort of strengths does an employee bring them? What if you see they've made a very clear, deliberate series of choices, they've gone back and done some postgraduate study, and then gone off into a different area, what does that signal to you? Yeah,
well, I think it's adaptability, it's flexibility as well, and resilience for a lot of people. COVID was probably a really good insight for that, because there were so much change for a lot of people to deal with, and people that came from a historical background of changing a lot in jobs or industries, it showed that people were coping a bit better in that environment. Change isn't great for most people, but I think as an employer, if you've got somebody that is going to adapt to something quite quickly and change, it's a whole new world in itself. Change, there are new roles from that. There are change managers and roles like that didn't exist 10 years ago. So change is a big ticket item for a lot of companies.
And what about this idea of purpose? I think Melissa and Emily both spoke about they reached this point where they didn't feel they were necessarily 100% fulfilled in where they were, so they started to look differently. How can an employee articulate that on the way in? Because we hear about job match and organisation match and those sort of HRE sort of buzzwords, but how can you actually see that on a piece of paper or an interview?
It's hard on a resume to show, I guess it's, there's a lot of things in that. There are a lot of people that talk about the passion of what they really want to do. Sometimes it's just, I always say to people when you're applying for jobs, it's always a great thing to address in a cover letter or speak to someone through a connection to say, this is something that I hold quite dearly. You can highlight a lot of things in your resume, but a lot of job placements come from people through connections, so a lot more than people actually realise. I think just communicating the things that you are, you hold dear as values to you that are in alignment to companies. Companies are really now shifting to align a lot of their own. I look at the university. We hold interview questions around our values. We hold them of much more importance than we would have I imagine 20 years ago. So I think for people looking for jobs, if you find something that does match your value, it's a big thing for a lot of people.
And I think it's we're possibly preaching to the converted a little bit because we've got a proficient LinkedIn user base watching us this evening. It's become more and more important that sort of space reflects your values as well as your written CV. And if our watchers are interested in that, you can go back and watch our January LinkedIn Live, where we really delved into what makes up a really great LinkedIn profile and marketing yourself, if you like, because it is difficult to prove on a piece of paper.
Yeah, it's true. It is. Job hunting is it's a profession almost in itself. So some people are fantastic at their job, but not so great in applying for jobs or not so great in interviewing. And sometimes that's a shame because they would actually be great in the job. So this is your best representation of yourself. It's marketing yourself. A lot of people don't like that concept of it, and it's not a thing that comes naturally to a lot of people. But something like LinkedIn it's a platform to really promote yourself. And it just doesn't come naturally. So it is, it is a hard thing for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I guess we're a university. So tell me a little bit about what a postgraduate degree looks like as an employer. What does it mean? What does it signal? What does it tell you? Yes,
well, I'm probably a good example because I'm doing one at the moment. I think a big thing that happened, a realisation for me, is that, I had studied one particular thing. I then looked at studying something completely different. And I think for me, a career shift was always, am I doing one or the other? And a lot of people think I can't make that jump from one, and even just using the word jump, it doesn't have to actually always be a jump. It can be a transition. I was in software development for a while, but I was kind of recruiting as well at the same time. So often you can make a transition that's it's an affordability issue, or there could be a number of reasons why you can't make an actual jump. But I think it's a added value to your toolkit when you're, like for me, I'm studying psychology now as a postgrad.
I'm glad you told us, because you dangled that out at the start of the answer, and I was going to have to come back and ask you.
Yeah. So my undergrad was in computer science. I don't know. I think for me, I'm probably tend more to follow jobs out of curiosity. So when I left school, IT was a whole new industry, something that I was so curious about. I did work experience in that. I didn't.
Emily actually earlier introduced me to the concept of the internet. So
that's it would have been a brand new thing back then.
Which is great when it works, but not always at the start of a LinkedIn Live broadcast.
Like tonight. Yep, true. So that was historically, I think, that curiosity for me, following something that I was very curious about. After that, it seemed a natural thing that I was looking for recruitment, in a sense that I was always finding people jobs. So I was curious as to how the whole placement scenario worked, and talent acquisition was a newer thing where people were in-house hiring and building capability to attract people to their company. So that was a next move for me. But then human behaviour is a really interesting thing. And so the concept, I've always had coaches and mentors myself, and psychology just seemed like a natural next thing that was intriguing for me. And that now is an added toolkit to my skills, that it's not just I'm leaving one thing to do another. I'm actually doing all of those things in my job.
Yeah. And I think that must help you in the classroom, does it? Or I'm making a big assumption, but
not in the classroom, because I'm not in the classroom. But
in the virtual classroom.
It definitely helps. I think employers generally look for people that, as an example, I'm doing HR and IT projects might come up, and often people will say, "Oh, Simone can get involved in that. She's got IT capabilities. She's in HR," and you kind of get opportunities that come up because you do have those added skills. I think when people stay narrow and they're in one particular sector or one particular thing that they have studied, in my mind, that's narrow for me. I think that having a toolkit with a lot of different experiences, you get opportunities for lots of different projects as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell me about that decision then to go and formalise it, because you sort of said you had that interest in coaching and you had that interest in the organisational development side of things, but then you made a decision to go and actually formally study
Yeah.
it. How did you arrive at that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it helps being at a university. So
Yeah.
it's often the case that, my son came home from school one time and said that we have this motto, it's called find a way or make a way. And I think if you really want to do something, you will somehow find that way. Most employers are so supportive of people wanting to educate themselves or them support. It might be financially. I think if you worked out a way, you could negotiate with most employers to say, look, if you can't support me financially, could I have study leave off, or could I, there's a whole range of options that you can have to actually make that work. And a lot of them instances, they are tax deductions as well. So I think financially, a lot of people think, oh, wow, it's just not achievable. But, I came from a scenario where I didn't have a lot of money at the time. I just worked out ways that I could, I enrolled as a mature age student to do my first undergrad. So I had to work for, probably 5 or 6 years. I think I was 25 when I did that. So affordability was a big thing for me, and I had to wait till I could afford to do that myself. But I had an employer who also helped.
And it is that idea of affordability and the skills that we need is something that we're seeing in the media discourse at the moment. The government's got their job ready graduates package, which is basically saying we need XYZ skills to rebuild Australia's economy after COVID, and they're chipping in the money to do it. It's never been more affordable than to be able to do some of those those short courses, graduate certificates than ever before, because the government is investing in those particular areas, which is interesting for us as a university to be able to respond to that and support the government in that ambition. But I think that idea of the barrier. What about the nerves of going back to the virtual classroom and having to write essays and...
Yep, true. I mean, that was interesting because the course that I did was a purely online course the year before COVID hit. So that was like a very unusual time to do that. Yeah, it was very fortuitous. And for me, I think part of me studying is that I feel like you should be always learning, always growing. You do grow from situations like picking up a new course. I found that I hadn't studied for over 20 years. So when I did do that, it was very difficult. I'm not going to lie.
Just take me through the mindset. There must have been some nerves, or I mean, you strike me as a relatively confident person. But,
well, I haven't always been actually. And then doing that course, I remember early on my very first subject of this course I'm doing now, it got to one of the weekends where I had an assignment due, and it just seemed so overwhelming, and just going back to doing exams in high pressure situations was so foreign to me. And I remember just being at home saying, I just feel like I'm too dumb. I just can't get this thing anymore. My brain's just not working like that. And it was, my son was actually studying as well. It's quite funny that we're at the same uni studying, and he said, "You're studying the wrong way. Like you need to do this and focus on that, and you're reading too many things." And it's almost like a formula of how to get your brain working again like that. And there's a whole heap of research about your brain creating whole new neural pathways, and you do pick up ways of actually studying, and whether people could say they become smarter, but you do actually feel like you can actually think things through in a more efficient way. I definitely felt that happened to me.
Well, to study fitness.
It's a mental fitness for sure. It's a way of thinking.
And then what about the application of what you're learning back to your substantive job? Is there a bit of, is it helping you to be better in the workplace as well?
Yeah, it is. In fact, my new manager now had said to me before, she was actually in psychology and went into HR the other way around. And she said, Simone, I use this in my job all day. Like, you're looking at, people's behaviours and how you think things through and making decisions. And so, same thing. It's not something that's a technical tick for what my box would be for qualifications for a job, but it's definitely a soft skill that I use all day, for sure.
And it sounds like you had that natural fascination and curiosity about where that could take you, and it's been almost a very neat fit.
For sure. And I don't know where that will take me. I mean, that to me is exciting too, that it does create new opportunities, and then you meet new people through that whole industry, and then things pop up that you hadn't thought of before. And life can be an exciting journey like that.
Now, to change tracks slightly, you said earlier that you were studying online before COVID hit.
Yes.
And that's obviously continued throughout that COVID sort of period.
Yeah.
How did you find that?
Yeah, it's fatiguing sometimes when you are in a job that's in front of a screen all day. So I actually do a tremendous amount of hours in front of a screen for my job. And then the best part about the online study is that it's flexible. So, I work all different hours in my job, and there's really only 1 2-hour slot that we come together as a group and we have an interactive tutorial. But the rest of the time, it's up to me to watch lectures at my discretion, really. I've been at the beach sometimes watching lectures on my phone, and it's a very mobile world now, so it's super convenient for me. Yeah.
And I guess, online tutorials probably get a bit of a bad rap, and I don't know if I'm wading into dangerous territory here, but how have you found that interaction with your classmates and colleagues?
Yeah, well, it's funny because my son, I listen to his friends talking about when they're doing their first undergrad and how it's ticking a box for a lot of things, cramming study and getting past the test, and you've got to just get your degree to get a job. When you do it later as a postgrad, it's generally something that you're interested in. So I'm not doing it to tick boxes and pass to get a job. I'm actually doing it because I'm interested in the content. So, I'll get to a tutorial early and I meet other people and I ask about what they're doing, and my daughter's just horrified that I would be communicating with a camera
Mum, you're
on,
talking to
even
people.
with your camera on. What are you doing? So it's very foreign to some people, but when you go back as postgrad and you're interested in what other people are doing that course for as well.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the
social.
things that's underestimated about postgraduate study is that there's the professional networking, but it's the learning off your peers who have come from all different backgrounds as well.
For sure. I have nurses, I have people in Hong Kong. We've got a really eclectic group of people doing psychology studies for all different reasons. So very interesting.
And I think we could talk about this for a long time, but I'm going to let our audience ask some questions. So if you do have questions for our panel, please post them up in the dialogue box there, and we'll pose them to the panel. I'll welcome them back to the stage very, very shortly. We'll be back live in around about 30 seconds. We'll see you then. Thank you very much for sticking with us. I'm very fortunate to be joined by the full panel now, and I'll pose any questions that you put in that dialogue box there to them, and we'll expand on that discussion a little bit. I have entered the 21st century. I'm hiding the iPad behind the paper here, so I can see your comments. So thank you very much for making those. We'll have a chat now for 15 minutes or so, and so you do have some time to get in any final questions that you have. But thank you to those of you that have already submitted any of your questions. I might start with this question here from Sana. Sana, thank you for your question. And Melissa, I might come to you with this question first. It's this idea, and there's a few of you that have asked questions along this theme. Is it possible to sort of switch and transition these careers and maintain your level of salary and seniority and remuneration? I think that's a pretty common fear here in the questions.
Yeah, I've been fortunate enough, I guess, to maintain the level of seniority throughout sort of my changing of careers. But I think also in terms of the way that I've decided to move and transition, I haven't gone back to start a whole new career as such. So it's really been, I see it, even though there's sort of, seemingly disparate areas that I've gone into, they sort of build on top of each other. And yeah, certainly things like, the film that I was working on is for a not-for-profit. So there's, certain aspects like that. But yeah, having financial security has always been something that's been important to me as well. And it's definitely possible to navigate through that. And again, I think for me, it's been really a process of building on top of what I already have cultivated.
And I guess it becomes a bit of a values decision as well, Emily. Teachers are, the pay scales there are fairly regulated, and
Yes.
you probably know what you're going to earn as soon as you graduate relatively clearly.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing that values probably overweighed the bottom line, as long as you can make ends meet. Sorry.
Well, teaching's got the benefit of a very clear career path. So sure, as a graduate teacher, you aren't at the top of the pay scale. I think that's understood. But there is this very highly structured environment where you can, climb that ladder and enter new pay brackets as you go. So, you're right that values did kind of trump pay to an extent, but also in my case, I come from an industry that's incredibly poorly paid. So it's pretty hard to, outdo publishing for being a poorly paid industry, considering the kind of experience and the sophistication of the skills that someone has to bring. So as far as pay goes, I actually have a much brighter future as a teacher than I did in publishing.
And I think it's an interesting thought that we've arrived at as a panel tonight about it's not actually just about switching and chopping into a different career. You're taking things with you, which leads me into this idea from Amelia, and thank you, Amelia, for your question. And Simone, I might come to you about this idea of, we're still on the remuneration and trying to get past starting out salary. So how do you actually articulate your skills? Amelia is sort of asking you, how do you leverage them to convince employers in your new field that you should start beyond the basic sort of level of salary?
Often that comes down to negotiations at the time people are, offered jobs as well. It's a funny world in how we actually apply for jobs, that some companies will advertise a salary, some won't. Like you said, they're like teaching positions where you know clearly what that's paying. It's not always the case though. It's just some people do undersell themselves generally with negotiating salaries. It's a known thing, and some people are just so good at doing that as well. So it's not something that people put on their resume. People see that advertised. It then comes down to the time when they've actually got to negotiate the offer to see whether they are successful in what they want. But of course, I think that it's part of your reasoning when you're in that negotiation process to say, in comparison to someone who has X, Y, Z, I've actually done this, and I feel a lot of people just aren't naturally comfortable with saying, I actually deserve that. But not natural.
And Melissa, I guess it goes to the point that you were making about, you've I don't think you said it. I think I've created this assumption that you've been cataloguing what you can bring to the table along the way. So does that help when you go into that sort of transitional point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had a period of freelancing actually for a few years as well, and you really have to start to be able to back your sense of worth and put a price on it, whether that's a day rate or an hourly rate or whatever it is. And so being able to say, okay, so I've drawn from these different areas of experience and built this sort of skill set. This is how I can contribute really meaningfully to this project or to your company. You really start to develop that confidence, I guess, in terms of what value you have to offer.
And we're getting lots of questions through around some of these niggling fears about remuneration and what other people think of us. And I guess Maria has asked us a question about, Melissa, that I'll stay with you for, but how do you overcome that feeling at the back of your head when you feel like you might be being judged by other colleagues at the commencement of your new employment if you've transitioned from a different field?
Yeah. It's really interesting because I've had it. So, because I came from sort of an arts media background, and then I transitioned to management consulting, which was highly analytical and enumerate, I often felt, oh gosh, I'm just the art student or whatever. And conversely, actually, further down the track, I went and worked for an innovation consultancy where they used design thinking as part of their philosophy. And so that was applying sort of design principles to the same types of problems, but from a different lens. And so there I was surrounded by graphic designers and illustrators and industrial designers. And it was so interesting because they looked at me and were like, wow, you're so mathematical. And so it was really this perception of my own, like, who am I and what skill sets do I have? It's just, I think, a matter of perception. And again, this backing of yourself and the value that you have to bring, and again, that is different. I've often felt very different in the environments that I've been in.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Emily, I assume that you're having a similar experience at the moment. You'd be stepping out into pracs, practical sort of placements in your teaching sort of course. How has that experience been for you?
Oh, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And because in case we haven't made it clear already, I'm actually in term 1, so I'm like in the kindergarten.
You are. I should have made it very clear that you're very fresh in.
Freshy. So, but one of the great upsides of the course that I'm doing, which is Master of Teaching Primary, is that we have this program called the InStep program, which has us working as an observer, as a class assistant in schools from like week 3. So I've already been in a school placement. and I haven't even finished term 1 yet. And it's such a valuable experience for so many reasons, but one of them is that it can be an opportunity to really affirm that this is the right decision that I've made, and in cases of some, it may be affirming that it's not the right decision. I think that's useful too. It would be a great shame to meet that realisation like at the end of your second year and go, oh gosh, I really hate teaching. Like that would be a personal tragedy. It's not one that I hope to meet myself, but another wonderful benefit of the professional experience, the in-step professional experience, is that we have the opportunity to observe and apply the learning from the classroom to an actual real-life setting, which is, you know, immensely valuable. I don't even know how to describe it. It's to actually see the theory, which can sometimes feel so kind of abstract, but then to actually see it play out before your eyes and go, oh gosh, right, that's what cognitive development looks like, or this is a working memory and things like that. Gosh, I can see the phonics application of this English lesson and to use that to kind of build this growing sense of capability. Yeah, so highly endorsed. And it was actually a factor in the decision for me to come back to UNSW. So I do think that I haven't compared every single last teaching degree in the world, but I do think at least in our part of the world it is a point of difference.
Okay, and I've got an interesting question here from Dr. Farzana. Thank you for your question. Emily, it's actually directed at you, and Dr. Farzana has asked, do you think that Dr. Farzana can switch to be a school teacher? Now, you don't know, I don't think you know Dr. Farzana.
I haven't had the pleasure.
But if I reframe that question just a little bit for you, what sort of, like, how could we help to make that decision? How can you explore it from being outside that environment?
Are you asking me to make a call on Dr. Farzana personally?
No, not on Dr. Farzana personally. How could Dr. Farzana assess whether teaching might be for them? What would they have to really care about?
Oh, well, the teaching degree there are two options. One is primary, the other is secondary. So for me, it was a very clear choice. Primary was where I belonged. The first thing you have to ask yourself, it is compulsory that you are passionate about children and young people, because if you are not, or if you're kind of a little bit weirded out by kids, this is not the career for you, because you're going to be around them all the time. Then with primary school teaching, one of the things that really drew me to that is that it is for the kind of generalists. So when you described yourself as a generalist, Melissa, I really resonated with that. And also, I suppose, as a career changer, having had quite a diverse background, it was all in publishing, but it was in lots of different kinds of publishing. I feel like I've got I can't choose. Like if I was to become a secondary teacher, am I a science teacher? Am I an English teacher? Am I an art teacher? I want to do it all. So that's why primary school teaching is where I feel really comfortable. Plus, I love that kind of age range between 5 to 12. Like it's such an amazing time for someone's development in someone's life, and it's a supreme privilege to play a part in that. But then other reasons someone might choose to be a teacher, this is a subject people do their whole careers about asking that very question. So I don't feel like I can make a definitive call.
No, but I think that's really helpful advice, and perhaps Dr. Farzana, a different way into that conversation for them. Simone, if I come to you with the next question here from Eleanor, who's asking, how do you demonstrate your proficiency in self-taught skills? And the example that she has used here is coding, that you haven't had that opportunity to use in a professional context.
You're saying in regards to an application?
Yeah, if you were
for a
applying,
job,
or you're convincing an employer that you want to work on a particular project, or...
Yeah. When I've mentioned before about a cover letter when you're applying for something, it's really just your heart and soul on that front page to actually express exactly why you're looking at that role. So I know a lot of people that just apply for jobs that they might apply for 100 and not put that in there. That's really where you're capturing that essence of, I know that the role says this, but I actually am quite interested in this, and even though I don't have that on there, it's something that I've, some people might have started studies in that or whatever it is they've done. You can really only capture that in someone's, brief time they look through your application in that actual front page, in the cover page at that point.
Yeah, so the cover letter becomes of critical importance.
And then you talk about that in your interviews.
Yeah, and I think this is a question that Sana has as well about this idea of transferable skills. So Sana's been in teaching and education management for a long time. Lots of important skills that you pick up in that sort of area, but is concerned that that's not getting taken into account because they've been in that field for so long.
Well, it's also a matter of finding the right roles too.
Yeah.
So sometimes that is a journey in itself, going out into the market and having a look at, sometimes there are roles that people take that wasn't something on their radar at the beginning. It's your role too to look at the skill set that you have and have a look at the match in that sense too. I mean, we do get people apply that aren't matched at all. But if you find in your heart there's something that you're really quite matched and you're missing a certain amount of skills that you could kind of relay, that is something that you could pick up or you've started studying in or whatever that might be, there's definitely a good chance.
Because it's sort of up to you as the applicant to prove your skill
But I
set.
think again, a lot of it's through connections too. I mean, there are some people who just apply for jobs online, and there are people who will say, "Oh, I know someone who works at that company. I might just go and ask." Like I did getting into IT, I asked 100 friends, "Is there anyone that has internships or that train people in that?" So there's a way of finding connections into those companies.
Yeah. Okay. So Melissa, I'm going to throw you a curveball because we've talked about this building this portfolio and articulating the transferable skills. How would you articulate yourself as a professional at this point going forward? This is not a question from the audience. This is me just throwing you a challenge now.
Yeah.
How do you identify yourself at the moment in that sort of sense? That's a big question.
It's a big question. Sometimes I grapple a bit with that sense of like, what am I? Like people will say, "Oh, what do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, do I say management consultant or writer or producer or yoga teacher?" And, it really depends. I think generally as I would just say that I've always been curious about things. I've always followed what's really sparked my interest and attention. And so I think there's a couple of threads throughout my career, which has been one similar to what Emily was saying around storytelling. So, I started in comms, ended up in management consulting and a few other bits. But what's always kind of carried me through those different paths has been a love of storytelling. Even as a management consultant, yes, you're wrangling an Excel spreadsheet and trying to make numbers and whatnot. But what I loved in that environment was then saying, okay, I've got the answer. How do I communicate that through a beautiful PowerPoint deck or like whatever it is? So storytelling has really been one aspect of my whole journey, I really feel.
I think I won't go into the PowerPoint deck tonight, but I've got a very dear colleague who tells me that you get a 30% bonus on just by having a nicely designed PowerPoint deck, which I've been working very hard to try and do.
Formatting is key.
Yeah, absolutely. I've even learned the brand colours, so that's how committed I am to it. Emily, I've got another question here from Maria, who is actually in a health-based sort of degree and job, but ready to jump into something completely new, which is similar, I guess, to the journey that you had to make. Now, you spoke a little bit about, examining where your interests and your passions and your values actually lied, and you took that job question away from it. I think a little bit from the way that you were talking about it. Was it values first, or did you have a job specifically in mind?
That's a tough one. I think it was values first.
Or do you have to have both? I guess that could be the answer as well.
They have to go hand in hand, and it can be a bit of a matchmaking game because it's not like teaching was like an overnight whim or anything. It is something that I have thought about for a long time and sort of dreamed of, like, oh, I bet that would be an interesting one to pursue if only I didn't, have to have an income or all those other reasons that we find to not pursue our dreams. But when it came to, there was the sort of, the values was an interesting one because it did match quite well with teaching. It kind of reinforced that as a direction. But then there was another occasion where, as part of a job I had at the time, they did some personality assessment, like a bit like a Myers-Briggs. It wasn't a Myers-Briggs, I can't remember the name of it, but it came up with list of, professions that might suit you. And I don't remember any of them except teacher was one of them. And I'm like, that's the one. And and I was not working in, needless to say that the job I was in at the time was not among the recommended professions for that profile. But yeah, so these kinds of little clues along the way do kind of accumulate to reinforce that moment where you are looking that life-changing decision in the face and going, do I have the courage to go for it this time? Is this the moment that I jump?
And it is one of those themes that's really come through tonight. It's that iterative process of building a career. It's all of those things that you develop as you go through, and you learn to articulate, and you redirect yourself a little bit, and you get these external cues and internal cues, and it all comes together and, you know, into this wonderful mess of the career now, because we're all living in a time where it's not linear, it's not that simple for any of us. It's learning what we can take from our past experiences and how that goes forwards, I think, is what we've really established tonight. And hopefully in the audience out there, you feel like we have established that as well. I'm just about out of time, so thank you very much for joining us. Importantly, I'd really love to thank our panel tonight, Emily, Melissa and Simone. It's been really wonderful. I feel like we could have stayed here for much longer, but the platform's going to kick us out. So I will thank you all very much for joining us, all current and former UNSW students. And I think the passion with which you've spoken has just been magnificent tonight. It's been a really enjoyable conversation with you all. And if we didn't get to your questions directly, we'll do our best to get back to those in the chat over the course of the next couple of days. So thank you very much for joining us. If you are considering postgraduate study, you can of course reach out to us at UNSW at any point in time, or any of the reputable universities around Australia. As I alluded to in the panel, it's a wonderful time to think about postgraduate study at the moment. The government's really heavily subsidising some of the graduate certificates and short courses, which means we can really help you to add to that skill set that our panel's been exploring tonight, and really transition somewhere else if that is what you're thinking. Now, if you really did want to come in and talk to us at UNSW about the opportunities that might be available to you and meet some of our academics and explore what it's like in a classroom, I'm aware that that's not somewhere we quite got to tonight. I had meant to get there, but we got so interested in some of those decision-making processes. We will be having a postgraduate information evening on the 19th of May, and all of those details will be sent out to you post this event. So we'd love to see you there. We've got a really exciting program there, and you'll be able to talk to academics from across the university community on that evening. So I hope to see you there if we don't see you on campus beforehand. Thank you very much for joining us. I've been Chris Lewis, and this is the University of New South Wales, and we look forward to talking to you very soon.